If recently you have felt as though something inside you is gradually becoming quiet, as if a part of your emotions has stepped back, then you are not the only one. Many people continue to live, work, and communicate normally every day, but deep inside they feel an emptiness that is difficult to name. Joy comes, but it no longer feels complete. Sadness appears, but it does not truly reach them either. Everything feels as if it is happening behind a layer of foggy glass. You can still see life, but emotions no longer seem to touch you the way they once did. In this video, we will explore the psychology of people who gradually begin to avoid their own emotions, why this happens, where it begins, and what is actually taking place inside the human mind. If you are interested in psychology and want to understand more about the quiet things within the inner world, please subscribe to the channel and follow along until the end of the video. When emotional avoidance lasts long enough, it begins to create a subtle shift in how a person experiences their own life. At first, its purpose is simply to reduce the intensity of uncomfortable emotions. When sadness, disappointment, or anxiety become too heavy, the mind looks for ways to create distance in order to protect itself. This is completely natural. The human brain is designed to avoid pain. But what is interesting is that emotions do not work in a selective way. When we unconsciously numb uncomfortable emotions, we often end up dulling positive emotions as well. That is why many people begin to notice a strange phenomenon. It is not that they are suffering intensely, but that they gradually feel everything becoming more muted. Joy is no longer as deep as it once was. Moments that once made them feel excited now only bring a very mild sense of pleasantness. Achievements that once made them feel proud are now simply acknowledged as logical events in life. Everything still happens as it should, but the internal experience seems to lack emotional depth. In psychology, this is sometimes described as the emotional system becoming less sensitive. When a person repeatedly creates distance from their emotions, the brain begins to learn that feeling too deeply is not safe. As a result, it adjusts its responses. Emotional signals still exist, but they are processed at a lower level, softer, and less noticeable. One interesting consequence of this is that many people in a state of emotional avoidance are often seen by others as very stable. They rarely react excessively. They seldom argue. They appear calm and in control of themselves. In many environments, especially in the workplace, this can even be seen as a positive quality. A person who does not let emotions dominate them is often considered professional, mature, and reliable. However, beneath that calm surface, another process is taking place. When emotions are not fully experienced, they do not disappear completely. Instead, they often remain in the background, like a weak but constant signal in the nervous system. The person may not clearly feel sadness, but they may feel tired without knowing why. They may not realize they are anxious, yet their body remains in a constant state of mild tension. This is when the body begins to speak in place of emotions. People who frequently avoid their emotions sometimes describe feeling as though they are always lacking energy, unable to fully relax, or as if their mind is constantly busy. They may sleep enough, but still feel that they are not truly rested. This happens because emotions do not exist only in thoughts. They are also processed through the nervous system and the body. When emotions are not allowed to be expressed and processed naturally, the nervous system must continue to keep them under control. This process consumes a significant amount of mental energy. It is like constantly holding a door closed with your hand. At first, it may not seem very difficult, but if you have to hold it all day, you will gradually start to feel tired without fully understanding why. Another thing that often appears is a mild sense of detachment from one's own life experience. Some people describe it as if they are observing their life from the outside. They still participate in activities, still talk, and still laugh when necessary, but inside there is a feeling that they are not completely there, as if a part of them is standing back, watching everything unfold. The mind does this not because it wants to reduce the quality of life. On the contrary, at the beginning, it is a protective strategy. If a person has experienced emotions that were too intense or too difficult to process in the past, the brain learns that keeping distance from emotions is safer. Over time, this strategy becomes an automatic habit. What makes this process difficult to recognize is that it usually develops very slowly. There is no clear moment when a person suddenly decides to avoid their emotions. Instead, it happens through hundreds of small moments. One time choosing to analyze instead of feel, one time choosing to stay busy instead of pausing, one time pushing emotions aside in order to continue fulfilling responsibilities. Gradually, the mind learns that this is an effective way to function in life, and in many ways, it truly is effective. The person may become very reliable, very responsible, and very stable. But the cost of that stability is sometimes the loss of the ability to fully experience the natural ups and downs of human emotions. What is important to understand is that avoiding emotions is not a sign of weakness or failure. It is often a sign of a mind that once tried to adapt to difficult circumstances. The brain is doing what it believes is necessary to protect psychological balance. But when circumstances have changed, the old strategy may no longer serve as well as it once did. Recognizing this pattern is the first step toward understanding oneself more clearly. When a person begins to realize that emotional numbness is not their true nature, but simply a learned way of adaptation, a new door begins to open. Because if a psychological habit can be formed over time, it can also be changed over time. When the nervous system begins to adapt in that way, the change usually does not happen suddenly. It is more like gradually lowering the volume of a piece of music rather than turning it off completely. Emotional signals still exist, but they are expressed with lower intensity, attract less attention, and interfere less with daily functioning. This allows a person to continue operating in life without being pulled into waves of overwhelming emotion. In the short term, this can be a strategy that helps them maintain stability. But over time, that stability sometimes comes with a difficult to explain feeling, a sense that a lively part of themselves has stepped back. Some people describe this state as if they are still participating in life, but no longer feel fully connected to what is happening. They may attend important events, achieve major goals, and even experience memorable moments, yet their emotional response is not as deep as they expected. This is not because those experiences lack meaning. In fact, in many cases, the meaning is still clearly recognized on a rational level. A person may know that they should feel happy when achieving an accomplishment, know, though, that a certain meeting should have moved them emotionally, but the actual feeling is more like a gentle wave touching the shore and quickly receding. The connection between awareness and emotional experience seems to become looser. One of the things that makes this state complicated is that it is often accompanied by the ability to function normally in life. A person experiencing emotional numbness can still work effectively, maintain social relationships, fulfill responsibilities, and even be considered stable by others. Because of this, they rarely receive attention or support from the outside, since from other people's perspective, everything still appears to be going well. However, internally, the nervous system may be in a prolonged defensive state. When a person continuously faces emotional pressure, the brain looks for ways to reduce that burden by adjusting how it processes emotional signals. This process involves brain regions responsible for evaluating threats, processing memories, and regulating emotional responses. When this system operates for a long time, it may learn to respond more cautiously to all emotional experiences, even positive ones. An interesting aspect of this process is that the body sometimes retains signs of emotion, even when the mind does not clearly recognize them. For example, a person may say that they do not feel anxious, yet their body remains in a constant state of mild tension. They may find it difficult to fully relax, difficult to let their thoughts settle, or constantly feel that they need to keep doing something. This is one of the ways the nervous system maintains alertness even when emotions are not consciously recognized. Because of this, many people in a state of emotional avoidance often feel continuously busy. They rarely allow themselves to stop completely. Their schedules may always be filled with work, entertainment content, social media, or various activities. These things do not necessarily have to be extreme. Sometimes it is simply the habit of opening a phone whenever there is a small, quiet moment in the day. But over time, those quiet moments gradually disappear. The absence of quiet moments is important because it is often in those silent periods that emotions have the clearest opportunity to appear. When constant distractions are no longer present, the mind begins to return to things that have not been fully processed. For some people, this can bring a sense of uneasiness or restlessness. As a result, the brain learns to maintain a continuous light level of stimulation in order to avoid confronting deeper emotional signals. What is notable is that most people do not intentionally create this loop. They do not wake up in the morning and decide that they will avoid their own emotions. Instead, small behaviors gradually accumulate into a familiar pattern. One time, choosing to scroll through the phone instead of sitting quietly with their thoughts. One time, choosing to work a little longer instead of resting and reflecting. Over time, these small choices form an automatic adaptive strategy. From a certain perspective, this demonstrates the remarkable flexibility of the human mind. The brain constantly adjusts to help us move through difficult periods. When emotions become too heavy, it looks for ways to reduce the load. When experiences become too complex, it looks for ways to simplify them. But this protective strategy sometimes has a side effect. It causes people to live in a state that is safe but not fully alive. Understanding this can help change the way we view emotional numbness. Instead of seeing it as a personal deficiency or a sign of coldness, many psychologists consider it a sign of a mental system that has worked very hard to protect itself. It is the result of adaptation, not a fixed nature of a person. When a person begins to recognize that their emotional flatness may originate from protective strategies formed over time, they often gain the opportunity to look back at their experiences with greater understanding. That does not mean emotions will immediately return with strong intensity, but it opens the possibility that connection with the emotional world can be rebuilt step by step. When a person begins to realize that their emotional numbness is not complete emptiness, but rather a protective mechanism that has formed over time, the way they view themselves often changes significantly. Instead of seeing emotional distance as a weakness or something flawed in their personality, they may begin to understand that it is the result of a long process of adaptation. The human mind has an incredible ability to find ways to keep moving forward, even when facing prolonged, difficult experiences. And sometimes the only way to do that is to temporarily soften the intensity of emotions. But it is important to understand that softening emotions does not mean that the emotions have disappeared. Most of the time, they still exist somewhere beneath the surface of awareness. They may appear in the form of very subtle signals in the body, sudden moments of reflection, or small reactions that people often overlook. A piece of music suddenly makes you pause longer than usual. A sentence from someone touches something difficult to name. A passing memory carries a feeling of warmth or sadness that you do not completely understand. Small moments like these are often signs that the emotional system has never truly disappeared. It is simply waiting for an environment that feels safe enough to begin operating again with its natural intensity. This explains why the process of reconnecting with emotions rarely happens in a sudden way. It often resembles a system that has not been used for a long time, gradually being restarted. At first, the signals may be very weak, very subtle, and even difficult to notice. During this stage, one of the most important changes is the way a person responds to their own internal experiences. When a small emotion appears, the familiar response in the past might have been to immediately analyze it or push it aside in order to continue working. But when a person begins to allow themselves to pause for a few seconds, simply to notice that feeling, something interesting happens. The mind begins to relearn that experiencing emotions does not necessarily lead to overwhelm. This process often involves rebuilding a sense of safety within. In many cases, emotional numbness does not appear because emotions themselves are dangerous, but because in the past, experiencing emotions may have been connected with difficult situations, conflict, or loss of control. As a result, the nervous system learned to reduce emotional signals in order to avoid repeating those experiences. When life becomes more stable, or when a person begins to approach themselves with more patience and understanding, this system can gradually readjust. Another factor that plays an important role is the ability to create moments of quiet in everyday life. In a world where constant stimulation is almost always present, making time for stillness can become a rare experience. Yet it is precisely in those quiet moments that the mind often has the opportunity to reconnect with deeper parts of emotional experience. This does not necessarily have to be long or ritualistic moments. Sometimes it is simply a few minutes of walking without a phone, a few minutes of sitting quietly before starting a new day, or a few moments of paying attention to the sensations in the body. Over time, these small, quiet moments can help the nervous system relearn that emotions are not something that must be avoided. They are simply a natural part of human experience. And when they are approached with curiosity rather than judgment, they often become much easier to understand than people once imagined. Another noteworthy thing is that when the ability to feel emotions begins to return, it does not only bring uncomfortable emotions. Along with sadness, anxiety, or unprocessed memories, many people also begin to notice that their positive emotions become more vivid. Joy may last a little longer. Connection with others may feel more genuine. Ordinary moments in life sometimes carry an unexpected sense of meaning. This is one of the reasons why psychologists often emphasize that human emotions function as a comprehensive system. They do not exist separately from one another. When a person gradually allows themselves to experience the full range of emotions again, they are not only facing the difficult parts of life, but also opening the possibility of feeling the positive parts more deeply. Of course, this process is not always linear. There are periods when a person feels closer to emotional connection, and there are also times when they feel distant again. This is completely normal. The human psychological system does not change in a straight line. It often adjusts gradually, like a continuous learning process. More important than anything else is the attitude a person carries throughout that journey. When curiosity, patience, and compassion toward oneself become the foundation, reconnecting with emotions often becomes far less frightening than they once imagined. Instead of trying to force themselves to feel something immediately, they begin to allow the experience to develop at its natural pace.